So just sit comfortably. Feel your breath. Relax the tension in your neck and shoulders, wherever. Straighten your back a little bit if needed. And just let go of thoughts and notice the rising and falling of the breath. And once the mind begins to calm down and your concentration builds on the breath, ask yourself the question, who is meditating? Is it the body? Is it the mind? Is it both or neither? Where is this solid person that we cling to in our daily lives? This identity, I, me, mine. And as you investigate, occasionally raise the concentration factor. If the mind gets too agitated with thought, come back and just observe your breath. And then resume investigating the nature of the I. And when you've searched through all the aggregates of body and mind and can't locate any solid, concrete I, just rest your awareness in that non-finding, that emptiness of a solid, inherently existent I. And if you want to investigate further, just notice sometimes all the thoughts in our mind, this investigation of the I, we can get a little spaced out and confused. But what is a thought? Is there any thing you can find that is a thought? There's something that keeps moving and changing in the mind that we label thinking, that we label the mind, or we have many other labels for it: feelings, emotions, consciousnesses, hearing, seeing, touching, smelling. Can we find any of those? you're ready, you can open your eyes. And before we begin, just a reminder that it's important to reflect on our motivation for discussing the Dharma. Seeing how we've been stuck in a situation that's unsatisfactory, not lasting happiness, and there's lots of suffering in our own life and the lives of others around us. All other beings have supported us in so many ways. So, how can we repay their kindness in the best way possible? It's only by eliminating our own obstacles and obstructions to seeing things clearly without confusion. So, in order to realize the highest enlightenment, we have to progress through the path, study the difficult teachings on emptiness, which is what ultimately removes the ignorance. So, today I'm going to talk about wisdom. In the Sanskrit tradition, there are three broad categories of wisdom. First is the wisdom that knows first is the wisdom that knows ultimate truth. Second is the wisdom that knows conventional truths, which relate to various fields of knowledge. Conventional truths are divided into 5 sciences: language, logic, technology, medicine, and the inner science of Buddhism, which includes most of the Gradual Path teachings. And third is the wisdom that knows how to benefit others. So this morning I'm going to focus on the first category, the wisdom that knows ultimate truth. Buddha said that all his teachings were for the sake of wisdom. Wisdom in the ultimate sense refers to the direct non-conceptual realization of emptiness. Ultimate wisdom is what frees us from cyclic existence and enables the achievement of enlightenment and the elimination of all suffering. It enables us to bring about not only our own benefit, but the benefit of all sentient beings. So what is emptiness? In brief, our perception of the world, the way we identify with ourselves and all other things as solid, independent, inherently existent people and objects is faulty. We don't exist as solid, unchanging, independent, concrete identities, and neither does anything else. The innate view of inherent existence is the source of all of our confusion and suffering. And the goal of the Buddhist path is to remove this innate faulty view and realize that all phenomena are empty of that mode of appearance. Once we eliminate the ignorance that mistakenly views phenomena as inherently existent, our actions will then naturally be guided by wisdom and compassion instead of delusion. However, performing the mental and emotional surgery required to remove this fundamental ignorance takes time. Our habitual way of seeing things is deeply conditioned by habits formed over infinite previous lifetimes. We must navigate carefully through the minefield of mistaken views in order to arrive at the correct view, which doesn't fall to either of the two extremes. On the one side, if we aren't careful, we can make the grave mistake of equating emptiness with nothingness. The view of nihilism causes us to disregard karma and pushes enlightenment further away as we fall deeper into samsara. On the other hand, we may think we've arrived at the correct view, but the mind still clings in subtle ways to inherent existence. Falling to the extreme of reification or permanence isn't as grave an error as nihilism, but it still blocks us from realizing the correct view of emptiness. Within Tibetan Buddhism, there are four main philosophical schools and several sub-schools. Each has a different description of emptiness. The philosophical schools, Vaibhashika, Satantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamaka, can be a bit tedious to study initially. Geshe Sopa likens the study of Buddhist philosophical tenets to chewing on bones. It requires great effort to understand the points being made. Sometimes I find myself reading the same paragraph a half dozen times, trying to understand the logical arguments. But if we wish to achieve liberation and enlightenment, we need to unravel the tight knot of ignorance which has conditioned us throughout beginningless lifetimes. My teachers all follow the teachings of the middle way consequence school, which is called the Prasangika Madhyamika in Sanskrit, of which Lama Tsongkhapa and his predecessors Nagarjuna, Buddhapalita, and Chandrakirti were the early proponents. Emptiness in the Prasangika school is described as a non-affirming negation. It's not a thing that we can find in our meditation, but an absence, something that we realize by negating its opposite, inherent existence. All of the lower schools below the Prasangika Madhyamaka say that the Prasangika school falls to the extreme of nihilism because of their position that nothing exists inherently, truly, independently, or substantially. These schools don't understand the subtlety of how dependent arising affirms conventional reality without harming the ultimate view. I may have said that backwards. The ultimate view doesn't harm conventional reality due to dependent arising. Anyways, you can play with it. If you search within an object or thing, you can't find anything solid or substantial that actually refers to that object. Instead, one finds that everything is what is termed a dependent arising. There are three levels of dependence. First, phenomena depend upon parts. Each of those parts can be broken down into smaller and smaller parts. And in modern times, our knowledge of quantum physics tells us that there is no smallest particle. Second, with a few notable exceptions, all phenomena depend on causes and conditions. Take our own person as an example. Without our mother and father, and their mothers and fathers, and so forth, going back infinitely, we wouldn't exist. We also depend upon all the food we've eaten in our lives, all of the air we breathe, and the water we drink. Our bodies are, in fact, 90% water. So we absolutely need to care for the ocean and rivers, the soil, and the environment in general if we want to survive as a species. Our minds depend upon all the books we've read, all of our teachers, all the authors who wrote books, all the mothers who cared for us and who fed all the authors when they were babies and children. So there's so many levels of dependence. At the most subtle level, the third level of dependence, our individual person and all phenomena depend upon conceptual imputation. So my parents named me Jordan, And according to scientific agreement, I am a member of Homo sapiens, the human species. I am a privileged white male, anti-racist, naturalized citizen of America who speaks English. I'm a Buddhist. I'm married and refer to myself with male pronouns. But these are all just conceptual labels imputed upon a valid basis. Conventional reality is based upon social agreement, and every language has its own vocabulary to describe that reality. Is it a raisin or is it a putaugan? One is English, the other Mandarin. Just different names for the same thing. So where is the real raisin or putaugan? Lama Tsongkhapa praised dependent arising as the most profound method of meditating on emptiness. So again, emptiness doesn't mean nothing. It doesn't mean that conventional identity isn't important. It's true that when you strip away all these layers of dependence, there is nothing findable ultimately, nothing we can point to and say, this is me, this is who I am. And yet people do exist and function in the world in a conventional sense. So the lower philosophical schools are very useful to study because they are stepping stones that walk us through the layers of understanding and misunderstanding and bring us to the ultimate prasangika view. But we must understand how to balance dependent arising with emptiness and learn how to see these two as complementary, not just via intellectual understanding, but directly in what is called a yogic direct perception, which, which is not through the veil of concepts. So besides dependent arising, there are many other different meditation techniques for realizing emptiness, both within the sutra tradition and the tantra tradition. The truth of emptiness one realizes is always the same, but the methods used are different. From the Mahayana view, if one wishes to become fully enlightened, that can only be done on the basis of highest yoga tantra. Highest yoga tantra utilizes a powerful method which enables one to see the pure appearance of the enlightened form and understand its emptiness within one moment of consciousness. So that's the summit we're aiming for. Tantra is often referred to as the quick path to enlightenment because of the very powerful method it relies upon. However, one must understand that Tantra is only powerful when one has a firm basis in the three principal aspects of the path: the determination to be free, bodhicitta, and emptiness. And of course, these all depend upon foundational teachings such as refuge, keeping pure ethical discipline, and abandoning our attachment to the appearances and temporary pleasures of this life. One can attain personal liberation or nirvana based upon studying the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination, which are found in the middle scope of the Lam Rim. But the perfection of wisdom teachings taught in the highest scope of the Lam Rim are for the purpose of realizing complete enlightenment via the Bodhisattva vehicle or path. The wisdom developed on the Bodhisattva path is based upon so many forms of reasoning compared to the individual liberation path. And therefore, the path is longer, requires more effort, and yields a much more powerful result due to the much greater accumulation of merit. A fully enlightened Buddha's virtuous activities are limitless compared to that of an arhat or ordinary saint. Not that saints are ordinary, but get the idea. The 4-point emptiness analysis is another important method for realizing the absence or utter lack of an inherently existent self. The first point is the most important. establishing the object to be negated, inherent existence. Second is determining that the self must be either one with its aggregates or separate from its aggregates. So, the five aggregates: form, feeling, discrimination, mental formations, and consciousness, all the different consciousnesses. So that's the ordinary basis of imputation for the self, is the five aggregates. So the self must be either one with those five aggregates or separate from those five aggregates. It's mutually exclusive. There can be no third possibility. We have to be really firm on making that conclusion. And third is realizing that the self cannot be identical with the aggregates. And fourth is determining that the self cannot be separate from its aggregates. After having reflected on these points, one realizes that an inherently existent self does not exist. At first, the realization is only an intellectual level, but in combination with single-pointed meditation on the correct conclusion, one can eventually have a yogic direct realization of emptiness. So let's go through these points one by one. So first, we have to try to generate this very solid feeling of I. For most of us, we take it for granted that there is a solid self, an actual identifiable and findable person. But the trick is to capture this awareness and analyze it. One of the best methods for doing this is just observing the mind when strong emotions arise. Perhaps someone accuses you of something. Hey, why did you do that? If we just instantly react and don't pause to notice the strong feeling of a solid I, we miss the opportunity. I used to hear stories that monks would purposely go to a busy street corner so that they could get bumped into, as a way to do this analysis of looking for the I. Who is it that's getting jostled in a crowd? And I know sometimes in my own experience, I can get a little upset dealing with, say I want to call the insurance company or something, and I have to navigate multiple menus, and then I get on hold for 10 minutes after, choosing about 5 options, and then, 15 minutes has gone by, and then eventually the line goes dead. And I'm like, how can they do that to me? So, that's when we want to apply the analysis of, um, the following points. Okay, so where is this I? Where is this me that's feeling put out and um, angry, or whatever the emotion is? There's and during our meditation, we try to recall those situations when that strong feeling of a solid I arose. So that's the first step. And or as part of the first step, or you know we begin this examination. So how does this inherently existent I actually exist? We kind of pose that question, and we have to be careful not to jump too quickly to the conclusion that the I doesn't inherently exist, and then we're just searching to validate that belief, because that's analysis is too superficial. We've already sort of reached our conclusion without doing the investigation. We have to really examine and investigate how the I exists. So if the perceived I and perceived inherently existent I actually existed, it has to be either one with the 5 aggregates of body and mind, or completely separate for them. There's really no other possibility. Sometimes in my mind I think, well, what if it was a little bit of both? Well, then that's that's separate, because it's not an instance of oneness. Oneness is completely one, but if it's like a little body, a little mind, then that's an instance of it's separate. It's not one with body and mind. So just to briefly review, the five aggregates are the body and the four aspects of the mind. So feelings, perceptions, mental formations. Mental formations, if you remember, is kind of like this um, bucket where all the various many other different aspects of the mind are placed in there, and then consciousness. So this is the second step, establishing this logical proof that there are only these two possibilities for how the self can be related with the aggregates, oneness or separateness. Then in the final two steps, we analyze and consider the illogical consequences that would follow from both of those possibilities. In the third step, we consider looking at the premise that the inherently existent person is one with the aggregates. If that were true, then there are five aggregates. There would have to be five persons. Or since there is only one person, there would have to be only one aggregate. Because if they are multiple, they can't be one. Also, if this imagined solid I and the aggregates were one, then the I or person would be superfluous. We wouldn't need the word I because it's already present in the aggregates. So you see, it doesn't make any sense. We run into all these illogical consequences. And then the fourth step, the third step is really the key, I think. Well, the first step and the third step, and I mean, they're all important, but a lot of analysis happens in the third step. And in the fourth step, we examine that the possibility that this sense of an inherently existent I could be completely separate from the aggregates. But that doesn't make sense, because then the I could be in one place and the body and mind could be somewhere else. Also, a person wouldn't be able to experience the karma they created earlier, because the self that creates the karma would then be completely different from the body and mind that experiences karma. And we could inherit karma that we didn't create. So again, these are illogical consequences. After going through these steps and considering the two possibilities for how the inherently existent I exists and not being able to find it, a feeling may arise of not finding the inherently existent I. That simple negation is what we then focus our mind on with single-pointed concentration. So once again, it's vitally important that we don't confuse inherent existence with conventional existence. Inherent existence is the mistaken appearance within our mind that is the root of ignorance and the source of all our negative karma. From ignorance, we generate karma, and all the afflicted mental states, such as anger and attachment, and all the 12 links keep turning until we remove the ignorance that hold things to be inherently existent. We must not negate conventional existence. There is a conventional I that creates actions and karma, that owns things and has relationships with other conventionally existent people. The I does exist conventionally, but not ultimately. We need to learn how to hold these two truths at the same time in order to become a fully enlightened Buddha. Once we gain familiarity with the meditations on the emptiness of the person, we can also meditate on the emptiness of phenomenon using the same types of analytical reasoning. The conventionally existent person is composed of five aggregates. All of the aggregates of body and mind are empty of inherent existence, as are all of the sense organs and sense objects, as illuminated by the Heart Sutra. As a person of European ancestry who was educated from a Eurocentric point of view, we are trained to see the Age of Enlightenment as the dawn of modern civilization, the historical foundation for what is noble, great, beautiful, civilized, and advanced in the modern world. There's much truth, beauty, and material achievement to celebrate and acknowledgement in the advancements of Europe as it flowered. My European ancestors were great scientists, architects, artists, and philosophers, but they were also conquerors and colonists. And since history is a tale of the conquerors, modern history holds up the Western world as the pinnacle of all that is wise and good in the world. Increasingly today, there is a recognition of how blind and arrogant this attitude is, how foolish we are when we ignore the wisdom traditions of indigenous people, including the spiritual renaissance within India and Tibet during the time of the Buddha, Nagarjuna, Atisha, Lama Tsongkhapa, and to some extent it's still happening today. We are very fortunate to have access to these teachings because even Buddha predicted that eventually they will die out in the Buddhist cosmology. You know, there's periods of vast eons where there's just darkness and there's no Buddhas, and I think there's no sentient beings except like on some subtle planes. So Lama Tsongkhapa belonged to what later became known as the Gelugpa tradition, one of the four main sects of Tibetan Buddhism. Within the Sakya, Kagyu, Nyima sects, there are many other profound approaches to meditating on emptiness, such as the techniques found within Mahamudra and Dzogchen. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that all of these traditions come to the same point, the same understanding of emptiness via different methods. I mention this because it is easy to become confused by reading different teachings from different traditions. The terminology is often defined differently, and a beginner can easily misinterpret different teachings unless they have studied wisely. On my first meditation retreat, a Dzogchen teacher told us to space out a little bit during meditation. I've studied Dzogchen very little, but I understood what he meant was to widen our perspective, to establish the mind in a view as expansive and clear as a blue, cloudless sky. However, we shouldn't confuse that with the view of the Hashang. Hashang was a Chinese teacher who taught that in order to understand emptiness, the key is to eliminate conceptuality from the mind, to stop thinking. Lama Tsongkhapa and all my teachers emphatically refute this view, pointing out that except for the times when we are practicing calm abiding meditation, that is the only time when we attempt to quiet thoughts. And even then, until we've actually reached the 9th stage of calm abiding, there is some conceptuality that needs to be present in order to employ mindfulness and introspective alertness. We often hear pithy advice by teachers to empty the mind, but what do they really mean? Blanking out the mind leads to nihilism, which leads to disregard for ethics and karma and rebirth in the lower realms. It's critically important then to search for a qualified spiritual guide who can help you answer questions that arise, avoid paths leading to suffering, and to be diligent in your studies with a critical mind that isn't afraid to analyze things on your own and ask questions. So I'll stop there, and I hope I said something of value. I really appreciate both of you for being part of the class. This has really helped me to deepen my study. Buddha always talked about the importance of uh, Dharma friendship, spiritual friendship, asking questions. Just in reading my little talk just now, I see parts where, well, I don't really get it. I'm saying the words, but I mean, you can tell. I'm no master, so uh, you know, there's lots of good books out there. I've been reading this book by Jeffrey Hopkins, Meditation on Emptiness, and then Youngster Rinpoche. Is that actually reversed? The type, anyways, it's called Practicing the Path by Youngster Rinpoche. Yeah,
Nice.
Geshe Sopa's book. So these are all fantastic. I've really enjoyed reading them, and we just have to study this stuff again and again, and the 3 steps of meditation are listening, which includes listening to qualified teachers. It also includes reading, and we have to think about what we've read or heard, try to apply it to our life, try to examine the logical reasonings, and come to a correct conclusion. And then the 3rd step is meditation, listening, thinking, reflecting, meditating, and just repeat, recycle, do that again and again. Keep looking at the way we cling to appearances. What triggers us in our daily life, what are our hot buttons, and look at those as opportunities to learn and grow and apply the teachings. Okay, where was the I in that situation?